afternoon, good morning. My name is Qingfeng Zhang, the Chief of the Rural Development Food Security Thematic Group. Concurrently, I also serve the office in charge for the Environmental Thematic Group in the Asian Development Bank. So welcome you to attend this very important distinguished speaker forum for the sustainable food systems. Today, we are very honored to have Charles Lee, the CEO of the Macro Collector, to share his vision with us how to leverage digitalization to promote the financial inclusions. It is now my pleasure to begin this session by inviting Teresa Cole, Director General of the East Asia Department, to deliver the welcome remarks. DG Teresa has served as the Director General for the East Asia Department since early 2021. Prior to this job, DG Teresa has been the Deputy Director General of the East Asia Department, country directors in India and Bangladesh. Before joining the ADB, DG Teresa spent quite a decades in US private sector, in financial sector, treasury, and also the auditing for the Fortune 500 companies. DG Teresa has an MBA from the Stanford University in the early 1990s and a degree in the economics from the University of the Notre Dame in the US. Now let's welcome DG Teresa to deliver welcome remarks. DG, floor is yours.
Thank you, Qingfeng. Mr. Charles Lee, Mr. Mac Hussain, Professor Kevin Chen, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Food insecurity is clearly rising in the world today. While it is a function of food production, food insecurity is equally determined by food availability to consumers. Recent events, such as the pandemic, followed by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, have underlined vulnerabilities to disruptions in food supply chains, which in turn have been driven by both financial and physical factors. Micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, or MSMEs, as we call them, as well as farmers, form the bulwark of food supply chains. MSMEs make up over 96% of all Asian businesses. MSMEs also provide 2 out of 3 private sector jobs in Asia. It is worth noting that 450 million smallholder farmers produce over 80% of food consumed in Asia. Therefore, it is critical for our developing member countries to have strong support measures and empower MSMEs and smallholder farmers to increase their productivity and efficiency. ADB has recently announced its plans to provide at least $14 billion over the period 2022 to 2025 in a comprehensive program of support to ease a worsening food crisis and to build long-term food system resilience in Asia and the Pacific. An important part of our long-term approach is to support farmers and small businesses, which produce and distribute much of the region's food, as well as to strengthen digitalization of food supply chains to ensure it reaches consumers efficiently. Digitalization of food supply chains can help in 3 ways. First, digitalization can shorten supply chains and cut out bottlenecks. Online platforms that aggregate demand can help reduce layers between producer and consumers, reduce the time to supply, and improve food availability and accessibility. Second, digitalization can improve throughput and reduce wastage. Through real-time exchange of information, accelerating the flow of food from farm to fork improves inventory management, reducing food waste, and avoiding stockouts that would otherwise lead to opportunity losses. Traceability can also be enabled, thus extracting higher value for the entire supply chain. Third, digitalization can enhance access to financial capital. It facilitates the flow of information, generates an adequate repository of data for potential investors' informed decisions. As we enter a world fraught with higher supply volatility and rising financial costs, providing support to small businesses is paramount to maintain stability of supply chains. Today, we have the privilege of understanding innovative digital financial solutions that address some of the challenges of scarce capital. It is truly my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the afternoon, Mr. Charles Lee. Mr. Lee is the founder and chairman of the MicroConnect Group. Prior to this, he was chief executive of Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited. He has also served as the chairman of JP Morgan China and as president of Merrill Lynch China. Mr. Lee has a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature from Xiamen University, a Master of Arts in Journalism from the University of Alabama, and a law degree from Columbia Law School. Let us now warmly welcome Mr. Charles Lee.
Thank you, Teresa. Thanks to everybody who invite me for this great forum. I'm not going to be able to talk about food security particularly, but I think what we are doing, experimenting in China today and through Hong Kong is a new way of financing, a new way of organizing financial markets that finally, hopefully, will allow capital to be able to access to small, micro and small enterprises starting in China in the digital age. So we have started a company called MicroConnect. I have been running center market for many years. And the one big realization of that is that the current Wall Street model does not work for the small businesses, does not work for the little guys. Not necessarily because it was not designed for that purpose. And increasingly, we are just financial market becoming in and of itself, existing just for itself, because we're trading literally thousands of underlyings, only 15,000 listed companies around the globe, and only about 5,000 of them have any real trading volume. So financial market becoming that few underlyings essentially means trillions of dollars of trading every day, not necessarily trickling down to the real economy. Digitalization, internet development, digitalization, particularly in Asia and in China in particular, have meant that tremendous innovation have taken place over the last decade, culminating with Ant's proposed initial public offering. But all of that digitalized or internet-driven financing, ideas have largely run into the ground as well. Not because of digitalization, but because of a lack of a fully comprehensive restructuring of a financial system and the structure and product to really allow financing to be able to access to the little guy. So we are starting this new efforts. And so today we have now invested in 1,600 small shops in China. And we're adding close to 400 a month. And hopefully next year, we will have 17,000 small shops, that we have invested and hopefully become one of the world's leading companies that actually have small companies as part of your investee portfolio. And so we have found a new way of doing it and want to share with everybody as to how this potentially could change the way we think about financing and we execute on financing. We all know digitalization now provide the transparency at the revenue level in China today, very much at the real economic level, particularly at the store level in the service industry. Consumption is about 57% of China's economy, and the 60% of that consumer economy is really in the small shops, services, retail, food and beverages, and all other, daily life activities. And that, the transaction are happening every day, but without cash anymore, which means that the revenue level of all the small little guys in China today, whose revenues are completely transparent. But most importantly, that revenue can now be structured to be intercepted, meaning that the payment system, the consolidated software system, all the way connecting to the banks of the little guys are in structure that actually can allow different accounts to be split for different contractual purposes before the little shop owner gets his revenue or her revenue. So with that structure is really the design of a complete new product. We call this new product, which is not debt, which is not equity. It's called a DRC, a daily revenue contracts, a daily revenue contract. 3 words, each one of them is essential. The money has to be, the return of the investment need to be collected on a daily basis. That collection need to be based on revenue rather than on profit or any other financial metrics. And 3, is structured as a contract. So that sort of a fundamental product is essential to realign the interest of the investor and the investee at the small shop level. The key nature of this product is that it's not debt, meaning the investor will need to share the downside with the shop owner. Therefore, this is a very popular product for the shop owner because they do not have to worry about the stress of having to repay this particular financing should anything happen to the business that ultimately make it fail. At the same time, it is not equity because, you know, there's no point of holding equity of a little restaurant or little shop. But we're also working with the franchisors of those shops. There's no point owning that because then we go back to the traditional economy. So we're not really forever equity holders, forever taking upside, unlimited upside. So therefore, from that perspective, the small businesses in China that we're servicing absolutely find the product extraordinarily popular. We have, people are crowding out of our offices in China, in Shenzhen, to seek this financing, and we are in active, digital discussions with so many players. Then people's natural question is, if it's junior than debt because they don't have to pay us back, if it is junior than equity because we don't really enjoy unlimited upside, why investor will be doing it? What's in there for the investor? What is in there for the investor is really the daily recovery. Because we are able to take money back on an every daily basis, 3 things essentially happens every day. Number 1, we exited position incrementally every day because we are taking some money away. 2, which is really the flip side of that, is that our risk exposure to the little shop investee is diminishing every day. So the risk management is a declining, a diminishing position exposure. And 3, the money comes back, is able to get reinvested. So the reinvestment allow us to essentially use the same dollar extremely efficiently for a few times on a few other people. So essentially for every investee who pays the returns, it looks very decent and responsible returns, but it's not excessive. So they absolutely can afford a mid-teen kind of an investment for equity-like investment. But on the other hand, that sort of a return is not particularly interesting for investors. So therefore, unless you have other ways to do it, you can't organize global capital en masse. But because of the daily recovery, we are able to reinvest the money every single day. As soon as we take it from one investor, one investee, we are able to deploy that capital. So our investors are able to enjoy a significantly heightened IRR because of that reinvestment potential and the daily compounding. Then investors are getting a lot returns, but not at the expense of any particular individual investee, small businesses. It's simply because of the efficiency and the velocity of reinvestment. So that allows us, because of the fact that we are able to break transactional businesses into daily recovery of returns, we are able to rearrange economic interest in ways that is not a zero-sum game that is often extremely hard to get out of in traditional finance. If you're invested in any businesses, typically, one is going to be unhappy, because if the business becomes explosively successful, the owner always felt that he was selling it too cheap. And when he was having difficulties and other people got away with murder. Or alternatively, the business that was not working out, the investors always felt that he has made a bad investment because the business was turned out to be not as good as he thought he was going to be. And he paid a price that is probably too high. In our model, we both get what we wanted. Small businesses got affordable financing without feeling the risk of having stress, having to pay back. But meanwhile, investors are getting significant, highly, possible returns. But how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this on scale? Because it sounds almost too good to be true. Well, we started this business by essentially focusing first and foremost on franchised stores in China. The stores in China, official register, small businesses in store levels is 70 million stores registered in China. And only 20% of them are franchised. And so we have about 14 million franchised stores in China. So we start with the franchise. The franchise in China work very differently and are very different in nature from Western advanced economies. Whether in Japan, in the US, in Europe, you have smaller numbers of very large franchises, and franchises have tens of thousands of stores on each one franchise. In the food and beverage industry, for example, you will have McDonald's and Burger Kings and Starbucks and all of that. So smaller numbers, maybe hundreds of brands, maybe up to 1,000 brands, but each one of them probably have tens of thousands stores, if not more. In China, it's the flip side. You have huge numbers of franchises. They're in the tens of thousands, if not over 100,000. But the bulk of them have dozens of stores, or maybe a few hundred stores, and then, limited numbers have more than thousands of stores, and only a dozen or two have over 10,000 stores. So it's a large number of franchises. But the key of the franchise is that any store on any franchise is already of higher quality, of higher investable quality, because invariably a franchise would have already had a good brand going, would have already got a supply chain going, would have already got a good control system going that collecting money every day from the store, would already have a collective bargaining power for opening up good location with good reasonable rents and leases, and finally be able to have a good entrepreneur working at the shop level as the shop operator, and creating value at the shop at the shop level. So therefore, we want our capital to go through the franchises, but into little shops, so that mom and pop shops, independent shops, which are extremely vulnerable, are not really investable or bankable in any way, they eventually become part of a franchise, even though the franchise may be small, but it's still on a smaller scale, but still have a good support system, a small ecosystem. And our funding is used, to fund the shops level. So essentially, a more precise reading of our, business is daily revenue of franchised stores. So essentially, we are funding a franchise who wants to open new shops. And then in exchange for our money for them to build CapEx, we want them to give us a certain percentage of their revenues of the existing operating shops. So essentially, again, we break the transactional relationship into different pieces. In traditional finance, I give you money, I'm the beneficial owner of that future interest coming out of you. You're taking my money, you becoming the obligor of that service and performances. Today here, it's a three-party transaction that our money is going to the franchisor as the franchisor's capital to open new shops, because that kind of capital in China, at least, is completely unavailable in sufficient amount, because for any franchise to develop, they need to add more shops there, and that capital is always going to be lacking. So we will provide the capital for them to get more and more small shops and franchisees to join the franchise and support them to succeed. So money comes from us to the franchisor for new open shops for the franchisor. In exchange, we will take a cut of the revenue of the existing shops that is already operational under the franchise. And we put our collection device every day collection onto the same system of the franchisor. In China today, where there's no cash anymore, all transactions at a shop level, all customers pay through a variety of payment systems, whether that's WeChat, whether that's Alipay, or any other credit cards and other things, but that get consolidated into the bank pipe, and the bank, towards the very last inch before it hits the account of the little guy, will have a split system where the franchisor need to demonstrate to us that they are able to collect money every day back to the headquarters. And then if we feel comfortable that's what they do and they succeed, then we will fund their franchise in exchange for shops revenue. We put our device next to theirs, and that allows them to allow us to collect money every day together with the franchisor as a percentage of our return. And the contract itself is a very simple one, because traditional finance is just too complicated, too heavy, too expensive for the little guys. Our contract is very simple. It says essentially have three components. One, what's the principal amount of money they needed to earmark to a particular shop, on which the shop its responsibility is for us to collect the money every day from that shop. It's the principal amount of investment. Two, what is the percentage of revenue distribution every day we are going to agree on initially during the first phase while we are recovering the principal? Three, what is the lower subsequent second period distribution percentage of revenue after we have already received our principal? Because that's the function where the little guy don't feel that they undersold the business. Once that we got our money back, we start to distribute, collect money at a lower level than the initial period. And whether usually it's half of the initial period, whether it's at the half of the initial period or lower or higher is a function of how soon we get our capital back. The sooner we got our capital back, it will drop subsequently, distribution level will drop lower than otherwise. If we get the money back later than expected, it will not drop as much. So typically the transaction philosophy or the business nature is, for any small business people in the shop level in China, if they spend $1 for that restaurant or for that food distributor or a particular shop, for every $1 they're putting, typically the life cycle is 4 or 5 years, they get about $4 back. And for that, if they use our money to earn that $4, we typically get $1.5, and the little guy get $2.5 as sweat equity. Our $1.5 becomes $1.3 if we got our dollar back very quickly. And our $1.5 could be coming $1.7 or $8 if our $1 comes back a little bit later than expected. So that way, we negotiate everything into a digital contract and execute it automatically. When principal is recovered, it drops down to a lower level. And neither the investor nor the investee need to worry about how exactly this is going to, how the transaction work out. And they just run their business, and we just run our investment business. Everything is automatically digitally executed. In this business model, traditional finance people tend to say, oh my God, how do you manage all the risk? In this business model, it's clearly is an equity mindset. The reason many of the old attempts at microfinance has not worked is because they're taking a fixed income mindset. Fixed income does not work. P2P in China, the ants financing, the supply chain financing in China, so many of the attempts, the internet financing or the fintech, if the business is a fixed income driven business, first of all, if the underlying assets, you're giving credit to the little guy, that is doomed to fail, simply because the risk and reward is just not structured properly. Because the credit providers, you take, if the business is doing really well, nothing to do with you because you just charge your fixed rate. If the business fails, it becomes your NPL. So therefore, your obsession is all about managing that risk, because the upside, you don't care, because it has nothing to do with you. That's the wrong mindset for small business financing. We need to change into an equity mindset. But equity mindset allows you to essentially, while managing the risk, but you're able to get upside. Hopefully you're generating enough upside of enough size and number to offset whatever inevitable losses you may have to suffer on the downside. And then you still make a good money for your investors, making this whole thing sustainable. So that's really is the nature of it. But because of the fact that the little guy does not have an IPO, there's no point doing equity. And also doing equity require you to check the profit, check the cost, all of that bring back the traditional financing burden into the little guy that they can't afford to support. So revenue-based, shallow interaction between investor investee at the revenue level, and daily collection, allowing reinvestment so that we don't have to charge the little guy all the way to the end, to the extreme. We just charge a reasonable rate that he can afford, she can afford. Then we just reinvested the rest and make the return on the next guy. So everybody is feeling that they're giving us not too much return, but on the other hand, we are getting pretty significant returns so that both sets get what they needed. It is the ability to break down the traditional financing structure, product structure, that allow us to achieve all of that. And I think my time is running out. The ability for us to do this successfully, we're doing food and beverage, we're doing retail, we're doing all sorts of services like hair salons, barber shops, and auto mechanics, all sorts of services, and all sorts of a dentist, and pharmacies, super, market chains, convenience store chains, all sorts of food and beverages and coffee shops. All of that is really daily, ordinary people's life. And if once we are able to really do everything on that distributed basis, and then we're making the exchange, because all the cash flow comes in, the investor may want to hold it in different ways and have different portfolios. So it's a blockchain transparent transfer and clearing and settle system that allows every dollar to be irreversibly, transparently traced to the investors and investee. So that sort of a model will eventually allow us to truly invest with impact, with precision, and with clear distributed manner. And then we can actually finally say, if food security is a key issue, if employment of handicapped people is an issue, if energy, preservation is an issue, whatever is the issue, you are able to potentially target specific businesses with specific measurable and metricable, systems to allow investor to be done distributedly, with precision, but more importantly, sustainably supporting the little guy. With that, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to make that initial introduction. Be happy to join you in the subsequent panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, chairs. It's a wonderful presentation, actually quite innovative. Link the a big market, very big capital, a venture capital, and with the small players, particularly with this as a micro, small, medium enterprises, and also the farmers, and also the food, beverage, and also retail. Now, join with Charles is the 3 key experts in a digital financing and also food security. I will invite all of them to come to the stage and also join this panel discussion with the Charles. The first one is Mark Hussein. Mark Hussein is the Vice President Agricultural Solution from the MasterCard company. VP Hussein is focused on elaborating local service providers through the technology to better meet their needs of the marginalized communities and also the those vulnerable and remote villages. He's completing a master's in the food policy from the London University, and also additionally brings his expertise in the data analysis and also business strategy. The second panelist is from the ADB, Thomas Abel. Thomas Abel is the chief of the ADB's digital technology for the development with the ADB. Thomas has over 30 years of the professional experience in digital technology and also the financial inclusion in Asia, Africa, Latin America. He worked with the governments, development organizations, NGOs, and also the number of the corporations as well. Dr. Thomas, he has also many of the publications in technology innovations, in development, very much focused on the education, financial inclusion, and of course is agricultural. Thomas has a master's degree in engineering and also management, and also bachelor's in the engineering from the MIT. The third panelist is Calvin Chen. Many of our colleagues in this area quite familiar with Calvin already. Calvin Chen is a tertiary chair professor from the Zhejiang University. He is also the regional director for the International Food Policy Research Institute. His major interest is focused on the impact of the major shocks on agriculture in the rural areas, agri-food value chain development, public policies, and the poverty, and the modeling of the food, environment, and the health access. Let me now probably start with the VP Hussein. VP, from the chair's presentation, he just mentioned about digital SMEs financial platform like the Micro Collector is a great vehicle to promote the financial inclusion. We also know that MasterCard has also established digital finance or the sales platform for the farmers or the SMEs. From your perspective, how you see the difference between the MasterCard model and the Micro Collector, and how these two different models can supplement each other? You have the 5 to 6 minutes to share your insights. Jose, floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for having me today. And it's fantastic to be able to learn from others who are working in the space and the innovations that they're really driving forward for the same overall collective goal. We, from a MasterCard perspective, when it comes to SMEs and within food value chains, we're driving a lot in terms of digitization of payments, and of businesses as a whole, and what that can enable from a financial inclusion perspective. And so I'm from a team within MasterCard that's called Community Pass, and our aim is to drive sustainable long-term impact by enabling local actors who are working with those on the ground, like MicroConnect, to serve remote and marginalized communities in particular who may have otherwise been digitally excluded. So we've looked at how can we bring MasterCard's standards and experience and expertise, particularly around things like security and safety and privacy, interoperability, user experience, to ensure that digital inclusion is then turning into financial inclusion. And so we have one solution in agriculture particularly called FarmPass that digitizes value chains and does so in order to drive efficiency and transparency for different value chain actors, farmers, cooperatives, input retailers, traders, processors, and other types of SMEs. We provide a digital identity for farmers. And then from that, we're able to provide them access to markets to sell their produce at a higher price in a more competitive market, access high quality inputs. And then from the rich financial history that the digitization of their sales and purchases that it creates, they're then able to access credit. And so we look for local actors, and especially on the credit side, local financial institutions that are looking to invest and looking to increase their exposure in the agriculture and financial inclusion segments. And then we are working with partners to explore different types of financing that can be made available. So things like providing inputs on credit as a way to manage risk, capturing repayment once a farmer sells their produce, working capital, supply chain financing. And so it'd be very interesting to explore once we're live in the same markets where we could bring MicroConnect and their MSMEs into this ecosystem. From a scale perspective with Community Pass, we've reached more than 2 million individuals globally. And that includes over 500,000 farmers in India. And we have other programs in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. We've been able to see strong impact in terms of farmers able to increase their incomes, able to increase prices by 20 to 50%, because previously the farmer was only ever able to sell to the one or two traders or brokers who happened to come to their village. Because on FarmPass, we have digitized their access to markets, they're able to access more buyers. And so with that increased competition, they're able to capture more value for their produce, so for the same amount, 20 to 50% higher. And then additionally, because through the ecosystem, they're able to access higher quality inputs, able to access credit, we've seen increases in yields all the way up to 3 times higher. So now we're at a stage where we think about, we've seen that strong traction, and how are we able to scale? So one dimension of scale, of course, is growing the ecosystems in each of these environments. And so in each of these markets, and so how do we bring in more of these different food value chain MSMEs into the ecosystem to grow its overall impact? 2 is that we're always looking for new partners who really have that touch on the ground, and have that vision to be able to stand up an ecosystem like this in a new market. And then finally, what we're doing to scale further is, how do we take what we've learned in bringing FarmPass as a solution to market and actually then enable other actors with their own solutions? So actors like MicroConnect or different ag techs, or even beyond agriculture, ed techs or health techs or fintechs. And how do we provide them the underlying digital infrastructure that is fit for purpose, built for these remote and marginalized communities, something that takes into account from the start things like, you're not always going to have connectivity, it might be intermittent. Things like literacy might not always be as you would expect with other populations that you're working with, and take this fit for purpose digital infrastructure and enable it to be used by a range of actors. So can we provide a digital ID that is biometrically authenticated, that is safe and secure, that can be used by an ag tech, and the same ID can then be used at a health clinic or in making a payment for school? How do we expand that from ID in terms of enabling payments that can work in an offline context where many of these communities are, and providing broader standards that connect them to a broader Community Pass ecosystem? And so that's briefly where we are. I think we do see, many connection points. MasterCard takes an ecosystem approach fundamentally to this. So we have done some of the digitization ourselves, but fundamentally want to see how we can provide that underlying layer to support and connect others who are doing this fantastic work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, VP. I think I like your terminology. The ecosystem approach is very essential, actually, not only just hardware and also this software, and also integration is also quite essential. Now, let me call up the Thomas. Thomas, one of the key highlights in the chair's talk is link the big international capital to the small player. Of course, in this process, leverage digitalizations driving the financial inclusion is so essential. Now, question is, from your digital technology transformation perspective, what are your observations about this opportunity? Of course, from the ADB perspective, how you see in the future our ADB's operations, particularly the digital transformations, can also work with the type of the innovations like a micro collector and also the mascots. You also have the 5 to 6 minutes. Thomas, floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Qingfeng. And it is a very interesting time, and that we're hearing these interesting approaches. And I think that in China, we can learn from their examples because they have done a good job of providing the basic digital infrastructure with payments and digital connectivity. So you can have this explosion of new opportunities. And I think that Charles described an opportunity that's very interesting. It reminds me of in the US, there's something called Square, that's a similar, basically, if you can serve the small business with payments and support, then you can create an entirely different financial model. And I think that's what Charles is outlining. It is very interesting, and we have to, digital will enable this. And I think if we look at other developing countries, we have to overcome the challenges of digital connectivity and digital infrastructure. We know today that most of the world's poor are smallholder farmers. And since probably about only half of the world's population has access to the internet, we do have a big barrier there to reaching many of those smallholder farmers with any connectivity, and that's going to be a barrier. But we also, ADB is focused on this. We have invested significantly in connectivity access across Asia, and with things like submarine cables and investing in new telco operators and satellite connectivity. So we do think that there is opportunity there. We also think that digital payment infrastructure is going to be needed. Another area where China has been in the lead of creating payment providers that are widely adopted and trusted. In many countries, the digital payments are not widely adopted and trusted yet, and there are many barriers. For example, people might prefer to use cash to avoid taxation, or they are worried about privacy, or they don't have identity. These things we also are supporting. ADB is supporting all of this, and I don't think there's any way to cut and paste any solution. You look at where China has private model for payments. India with Aadhaar and their UPI model is also very interesting. And we don't really know which model is going to be right for any particular country, but I do think that this is an area we want to work on more, especially for the agriculture sector, where those are the people who are least connected and need the opportunity the most. And then when you do get connectivity in people's hands and payments and solutions of basic infrastructure, then these new business models open up. And I think there are many of them. I would say, I think MasterCard is a great example because they operate in many different countries around the world and have a very strong focus on financial inclusion. So they have very good knowledge. I'm amazed. I've worked with MasterCard a lot in the past, and I just am amazed at how little people understand what their business model is. And there's so much to it. We always have trouble figuring out which piece of MasterCard to latch onto and learn from. But of course, we're always willing to learn. But I would say there are many opportunities in agriculture, and Charles got into it. New business models for financing, for equity, for supporting small businesses. Now, farmers have a different problem in many cases where they have a growth cycle. They have to buy inputs, plant crops, and then wait till the end of the season to harvest and get paid. And that's a complex financing model. that often needs government support. And I don't know how the private sector is going to solve that, because farmers have precarious livelihoods, and in order to make that attractive to the private sector will take some work. But I think there are innovative approaches. We have also in agriculture, I think there's an opportunity to look at high value ecosystems like coffee. Coffee has a high value and a lot of cash revenues available. And there are examples. There's a company called Cropster that actually was started by someone from the CIAT Tropical Agriculture Organization in Colombia that basically ties together high-end coffee producers and high-end coffee shops. And it's a very interesting model because it's digital integration in a very narrow context. And that, I think that's an opportunity to look at as well. The other one is just knowledge. We know that the previous model of government's ag extension agents providing farmers with knowledge, that's kind of broken down. And the internet and connectivity gives you new options there for farmers to get access to knowledge more readily, more customized to their needs. There's an example called WeFarm in East Africa that connects more than 1 million small farmers in their native language with very relevant information rather than academic or generalized information. And there are so many things like this we can invest in. And I do think that we need more work like this. And I think forums like this that can help us sort these things out. And then the last thing I would say is that we have to be ready, because those farmers who are not connected will get connected at some point, because the reach of connectivity is getting greater and the cost is coming down. We can't drive that 100% ourselves, but when you prepare for it, I think that's going to be a big transformation. And we could look at areas like China that has achieved a high rate of internet access. What happened when that was achieved in the small rural areas? I think it's a kind of an example we call the Uber model in the US or in the West, where Uber happened as a ride-sharing model immediately after the smartphone. The smartphone was a required infrastructure. And I think that in agriculture, you're going to have something similar, where smallholder farmers who have gone from no access to now having internet access with a smartphone will open up all kinds of possibilities. And we want to be ready at that point with the solutions that will work. And I do think, Charles's example and the work MasterCard's doing are all along these lines. But we want to make sure it's timed with that access, because without the access, a lot of the things we're talking about don't work. It's not because the ideas are wrong, it's just that the timing is off. And we want to make sure we invest in the right way to make sure that we, don't nullify the opportunity, because people think it's, might think it's a failure if things don't line up properly. So basically that's my quick introduction. Thanks, Jinping, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. I think you raised a number of the key points. Of course, digital infrastructure is quite essential, but at the same time, you also mentioned about the role of the government, particularly for the agricultural food security area. We cannot ignore, underestimate, the role of the government. I think this is the question I need to invite Kevin Chen to the floor. Of course, we understand the micro-collected RILO is a new innovations, link this international capital to the small players, particularly from the private sector perspective. But now we understand after the PRC's 20th Party Congress, the government RILO introduces a supply and market cooperative associations. Now is a same thing, the government try to fill the gap. These new associations are going to become the key vehicle to provide the inputs and also extend the services to the farmers. Actually, when ADB invites the Internet Plus Agriculture in Gansu province, financial department requires us to work with this type of the associations already. So Kevin, the question is how you think the micro collective, this type of the new innovations can, team up with a new initiative from the government, this supply and the market cooperative associations to maximize the benefits of the farmers and SMEs via their public-private partnerships. Kevin, you have the 5 to 6 minutes. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Kim Fong, for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here. And when listening to the story on the Micro Connect from Charlie Lee, it's like music in my ear. I remember when I did a project with ADB back in 2013 and 2015. That time, ADB supported me to conduct a value chain financing survey with the agri-food sector in China, Vietnam, Cambodia, India, particularly with the rice sectors. So we look at the farmers, we look at the small and medium enterprises and micro enterprises. What we find out is very few actually use the formal credit or loans, right? Why? Because the process to them is way too tedious, right? They don't want to go there. So with the Micro Connect type of model, certainly based on the revenue-based dairy and the contract, that seems to be able to solve that particular problem, right? So it could be very promising in addressing. It's not mean that small guys or farmers does not need credit, does not need money, but it's just the market are not quite there to serve them. So sounds to me the Micro Connect model offer very promising tools to address some of the very explicit barriers in the financial market, which are addressed in the food system. As we all know, finance the food system is important. Financing the small and micro enterprise and the small farmers are key to achieve the food security. Now, if we look at China, as the Qingfeng mentioned, with that promoting of the Farmers Supply and Marketing Corporate Association, this is an old organization in China, has been served in China for a long time, right? Now it's got a new attention from the government and from the market. Why is that? The reason, one of the reasons is certainly government has felt the small guys in the food system, they did not get adequate support they needed, including the financing. So if we look at the Farmers Supply and Marketing Corporate Association, they try to provide inputs to the small farmers, right? They try to help the small farmers to sell their products to the big markets. And they also try to provide credit support to the small guys. But they have a challenge. Organizationally, financial model, they don't have that yet. So with the new mandate from the government, what do they need to do? They need new models, right? So if they look at a Micro Connect, what kind of interest in saying that particular model is to do, probably is something they should look very seriously at. So how the model which is proposed by Micro Connect type of financial model can mingle together with the Farmers Supply and Marketing Corporate Association, because that association is quite big. They have more than 30,000 shops across the country, right? If you think about that. And so this huge potential. But again, if you serve the agriculture, serve the food system, the model itself may be needed to be adapted. As Thomas rightfully pointed out, agriculture has a strong seasonality, right? The daily-based revenue recovery, how can we make that work? Is there a way to make that work? It's going to become quite challenging. But I know I only have 1 minute left. So what I would say, this kind of model is really fascinating to me. And so based on the new technology, but the important thing is you needed to have infrastructure there, the digital infrastructure there to serve that, right? China certainly is a good starting point for this kind of model to be adopted. But in other Asian country, probably we need to invest on the digital infrastructure first. With that, let me conclude that. Back to you, Qingfeng.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Now, thank you for your insights. Now we already collected some of questions from the floor. I think, of course, we will give the opportunity to chairs also reflect the inputs from those three panelists. I think chairs probably we will collect your insights. One is your reflections from those comments from the panelists. Second is one comment from the chat box. You already say, like the Cambodia, they have the 98% of their enterprises is a small scale. So the question is why you think for the future your micro collected can this type of the model can be also replicated to the Cambodia. So probably let's go back to you first, and then after that, we can collect more questions and open floor for discussions. Charles, over to you. You'll probably take 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I think our model obviously is premised on digitalization. Our model is premised on our ability to be able to collect, intercept revenue before the little guy gets the revenue. So that requires that infrastructure to be in place. So in any society that still a lot of cash around, you are not able to really rely on the revenue in projecting how much you want to invest. And once you make the investment, you do not have the system, you do not have the comfort that you are indeed going to be able to collect the percentage of revenue, because if they begin to take, the leakage is something that is going to be difficult. So for any other economy today that is still have a lot of cash around, and our model in its precise form is probably difficult to implement right away. But as we develop this model with greater confidence and experience in technology, and also with Southeast Asia economy going through a different phase of e-commerce. China essentially, thanks to Ali and Tencent and Jingdong and many other internet giants, they connected the country and almost like build a national network of highways, and they connected every family, everybody. And but what they didn't do, which is one of the reasons why they didn't really bring financing to the next level, that the way that they did in internet, in commerce. They did a tremendous success in commerce, so that we now, commercially, when we are buying things and selling things, everything is online, and then there's a system to connect everybody. But that system could have been easily used to upgrade the entire financial system. They missed the opportunity. The reason they missed the opportunity is because they never really considered financing from an investment perspective. They took the easy way out of essentially relying on bank financing, and then do credit, and then charge a risk-free arbitrage in interest spread. Because of that mentality, China's internet financing never took off, and is probably run into the wall with the Ants IPO, because the system, the risk of the little guys in the small economy is going to create a lot of risk. So the key is, who is going to bear that risk? Because if you allow fixed income investors to be directly accessing into it, and with the internet financing guys, the internet guys not taking any risk, but charging a risk-free arbitrage, that's the root of the problem. And today, the reason we could successfully work is because we are raising risk capital. We are investing risk capital into the small guys in an equity mindset, actually absorbing all the risk. And then we will sell the underlying assets to the banks, to the fixed income guys, but allow the portfolio that we hold with our own capital or with our investors' capital in equity-like, so that we essentially screen the risk off, so that the middle part absorb the risk, let the fixed income guys enjoy a secured return, but not exposed to unlimited risk, which they couldn't. Only when we are able to get fixed income guys to be totally in the small business universe, we can succeed. Because fixed income is the largest capital pool in the world today. They unfortunately unable to go there. Alibaba, Tencent, and everybody is trying to bring them there directly. And then let the state, let the banking sector take all the risk. That's just never going to work. So therefore, we need to have that equity cushion. So going back to the question whether or not other countries can do this, I think their opportunity is for their Alibaba and Tencent to develop their payment system structure together with the equity investment system like ours. They can do it on their own, or they can work with people like us, so that when they build the highway system, just don't try to rely on public banking financing to go there and you take no risk. Build pockets of sidelights of small business groups and muscle groups, so that let investors like ourselves to be investing in those small businesses like a shared equity cushion, so that fixed income guys can truly plug into those sectors. So for Southeast Asian big e-commerce followers of Tencent and Alibaba, if they can bring the micro-connect model directly into it and build the investment systems, a muscle system onto it, rather than let fixed income and banks directly go in there without anybody absorbing the risk, I think that's the right way of doing it. And when they do that, then this, the payment system they are building, they can build ecosystem in which only cash is taken, or no, only e-commerce payment, direct digital payment is taken, but with some sort of a cameras and other protections against, collection of cash, so that we are able to monitor it and collect them. Yeah, you may be able to do it without completely a cashless society like China, but do it in an ecosystem where there are other digital tools for you to be able to capture that revenue, because you need to have equity investors make a decent return before they can serve as the risk absorbing cushion for massive fixed income guys to get into the small businesses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, chairs. Yeah, in the chair box, of course, from my colleagues, they also write a number of the questions already. The first question is, of course, is also come to microcredit. Is how this model ensure the good social impact, and of course, it's also like promote the regional and global public goods, like the addresses the food safety. Probably for these questions, we ask Dr. Linton, since he's also in this room and also working in the ADB before. Right now is a chief investment official on the micro-collected. Probably he can help address these questions. For other two questions in the chair box, one is how we can make the agroforestry ACT more accessible, more affordable. I think the address is open rural divide. Probably Thomas and also Mark can help address. Let me first call Dr. Lin. You are still in this room. Can you say a few words?
Thank you, Qingfen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I joined, as you said, I joined ADB about 17 years ago. I was working for East Asia department, and I also had the pleasure to work as agriculture coordinator for the bank. So this is very much like a homecoming for me. Although I left the bank more than a decade ago, but the impact of ADB has been lifelong lasting. A lot of financial professionals around the globe, like myself, believing one can do well by doing good. So that's part of the reason I joined Charles in MicroConnect in this startup. Let me just share, going back to the question, let me share with you a few statistics, impact statistics of the MicroConnect. By this September 2022, just a few, slightly over a year into operation, MicroConnect has invested into more than 1,000 stores in China, and that number has increased to 1,600 today. And our goal is to invest by 2030, we're going to invest into more than 1 million stores in China. In terms of social impact, out of the 1,000 stores we invested by this September, 625 of them were female-owned. And just in a few months, within those few months' time, we were able to create 11,000 jobs in China, and 60% of them are female, are taken by female workers. Our goal is by 2030 to create 10 million jobs in China. And in terms of financial inclusion, by September, we covered 126 cities in China, and 2/3 of these cities were located in tier 3 or below. So our goal or dream is by 2030 to cover 100 million communities within China. And last but not least, in terms of food security, as Charles mentioned, the majority, 72% of our investment goes to food and beverage and retail. Those were the last mile of food security. I think those are very, very important. I understand ADB is very serious about food security and going to make a meaningful investment into this area. So if a company like MicroConnect can partner up with ADB in some way, where I think that will be very, very exciting. So hopefully we can follow up on this. Thank you, Qingfen.
Thank you so much, Tuan-Ning. Now the question for the affordability and also accessibility, probably Mark and Thomas can address that. And the question from Navin, probably Kevin, you can help address. Mark, over to you.
Great, thank you. I would say regarding more broadly the cost of ICT investment, and I believe Thomas touched on this point as well in terms of the necessity of having that basic digital infrastructure. So I think there are two things that we keep in mind in particular. One is around ensuring that the digital infrastructure we're building is fit for purpose. So acknowledging what's the situation today rather than waiting for a connectivity, how can we build now solutions that can work, for example, in offline or intermittent connectivity environments. And then two is how much can we build that is interoperable so that it can be used for a range of services, ensuring it has certain standards in terms of safety, security, and privacy, so that things like the digital identity, things like the digital payments, what that can then enable in terms of access to markets is in place. And so from that, that's where we have the transparency, and that's where we have the ability to access financing to allow for additional incremental investments into areas such as mechanization or agroforestry in particular. So I think that's the general approach that we take around ICT investment. How do we make sure it's fit for purpose? And how do we make sure it's interoperable to lower the cost for everybody involved?
Thank you, Mark. Thomas?
Sure, thanks, Qingfen. Yeah, I think that, well, first I have to say congratulations to Mr. Lin for actually going to a startup. And when we see ADB, former ADB folks actually doing a startup, it's great. We know our beloved Sohail Hasni is leaving to do his own startup, I think, with an agriculture dimension. So we see that this is an opportunistic area if this is happening. It's great news. Yeah, and on the making this affordable, I think first that the rural areas will always be behind in connectivity. There's just no way around that, because you can get high density fiber and 5G in cities, and you're just never going to have that in rural areas. But rural areas don't have to have the same level of connectivity in order to benefit. And there are innovative solutions from lower satellite fleets that are coming along, and new forms of telco models. And I would suggest people look at the Reliance Jio model in India, which rolled out a nationwide 4G network that they offered for free for 6 months, or three to 6 months, before even charging people. And now they have probably average revenue per month per user of under $1 with a high-speed 4G network. This can happen, and I think that network covers 98% of the Indian population. So these things can be done. I think there will need to be regulatory improvements and innovations to make it happen in many countries, including, say, Philippines, Indonesia, that have thousands of islands, or landlocked countries with mountains. These are going to be challenges. But I think that the low-cost connectivity is on its way, and farmers need to get at the bottom line extra income. It's not just about simplifying, but they have to see the bottom line, that they're going to get income from new markets and new solutions. I think that's why Charles's model is great, because it really provides that. They won't invest, the investors won't invest, the entrepreneurs won't join it unless they see tangible return, and that's what digital can do. So I do think that the opportunities are coming. And I just have to comment, Changping, on Cambodia, because I went there about 3 years ago, and I saw the ads for Wing. Wing is their digital payments network, and they do need the connectivity, but they're starting to put the pieces in place. And I think that getting the digital ID and the internet more accessible, and then somebody like Wing could partner with a business like Charles to actually implement this model there. That kind of thing is definitely possible, but all the pieces have to be put in place. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Calvin, probably you have the 1 minute. Calvin, you
Yes.
see it?
Hi, Jianfeng.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just say a few words regarding the smallholder farmer. How can we integrate them better with the global value chain? And smallholder face a tremendous challenge, technically, management-wise, and financially. So the micro connect type model certainly offered some potential to address some of the issues they face. But financial, I think, is key. How can we get money into the hands of small farmer and micro and small enterprise? That's going to be key to make the food system running smoothly. It will be very critical to ensure the food safety, for that matter. Back to you, Ching-Feng.
Thank you so much. We still have the 2 minutes. Probably ask one of my colleague. He worked for the Rabobank for many years. Of course, originally based in India. Here has some observation, compare opportunity in China, also in India. I'll probably give him a 1 or 2 minutes. Lyria, come to the stage. You have put so much effort to organize this. It's a wonderful sessions. Probably you can share your insights. Lyria, over to you.
Thanks, Ching-Feng, and thanks to all the speakers, Charles, Mac, Thomas, and everyone else who's here. Thank you all for such an enriching discussion. I just thought that Ching-Feng, you mentioned comparing two largely digital economies now, China and India, and there are several I think parallels. Thomas also mentioned just the Indian example, and how digital connectivity can actually is an area where supply can actually create demand, and then you get on to a virtual cycle of growth. And Charles also has the business idea of MicroConnect is clearly riding on the fact that information can be exchanged, information can be analysis can be extracted out of the information, and decisions can be made, which clearly supports the basic idea that Charles has of risk sharing, which is a fantastic and breakthrough idea in my view. But one thing that is probably also which needs attention is Charles mentioned digital contracts. So contracts are entered into, and that's a very key aspect of of operationalizing this model. So we need to evolve standards. We need to evolve protocols. We need to evolve methods of contracting digitally, so that it is the industry can adopt it. Multiple players can adopt it without there being a degree of customization each time contracts are evolved. So standardization will really help expand the industry. At the moment, to me it seems microconnect is a monopoly, but I don't think it will stay that way. So it's going to expand. It's going to expand not only in PRC but in other countries as well. Digital infrastructure is required, as was pointed out by many here, as a prerequisite. But digital infrastructure is coming, and organizations like ADB, along with its clients, the DMCs, are working hard to set digital infrastructure in place. So then what? So it's a matter of time before this happens. So I think we need to pay a lot more attention on the governance, on the standardization, on contracts, etc. Maybe there could be some views that Thomas or anyone else would have on this. But as such, this is an area that needs a lot more. I mean, I'm not even talking about the financial aspects of this whole business model and the relevance to the last point I wanted to make was on the relevance to food security as well from a production angle. Daily revenue share, as Kevin also pointed out, is a highlight of this business model. It really gives that kicker to the IRR. But there are business models in agriculture, like livestock, like dairy farming, for instance, where there is a daily revenue that dairy farmers make. And can that be amenable to microconnects model, or even in seasonal farming, where you have storage infrastructure in place? So can the produce be stored, and then you have potential of daily sales, where then revenue can be shared? Is that so once such ideas start getting applied, agriculture and production is a huge space, and any financial capital that can be made accessible to producers like farmers would be invaluable to them. I mean, it's like financial inclusion, development, and everything put together. So let me stop there. I mean, I had these few thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much, Larry. Of course, this discussion is only the start of our long journey. I think we can launch a follow-up discussions. So with this, we a little bit run out of time, but I think I take this opportunity. I want to thank Charles Lee for your very patient and also very insightful presentation. I think one of our colleagues in this room learned a lot, and also thanks Teresa Cole for her welcoming remarks, and also thanks Thomas, Mark, and also Calvin for your sharing your knowledge and observations from the different perspectives. Of course, today again is a good kick start of our digital transformation and also financial inclusion for food security. Again, as Teresa mentioned in her opening speech, ADB announced its $14 billion food security ambition, which is last from the 2022 to 2025. Digitalization agricultural value chain is one of the key areas we're going to focus on. So we hope taking this opportunity, we can work with one of the key partners, including the micro-collected, MasterCard, Zhejiang University, EPRIM, one of the colleagues to really map out the action plan for the the $14 billion implementations. So with that, let me just close This is very rich and also inspiring discussions today. Thank you again. And we are probably need to have another in-person meeting early next year, either in Manila or in Beijing or New Delhi or wherever appropriate for our discussions. With that, thank you so much. Let's stay in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.